Good morning everyone. I'm going to be using watercolour pencils to create a portrait. You can use the same technique with normal pencils, it's completely up to you. But do remember that pencils are always a labour intense medium to work in. Therefore, I'm working on a smaller scale for this project. This is just an A4 piece of watercolour paper. Because I've got watercolour pencils, that makes sense. If you're using normal coloured pencils, then you can use normal paper. A nice smooth grain is what you're looking for with pencil. The smoother it is, the easier it is to build up layers of colour and to blend them and get more of a realistic tonal appearance in the artwork. So I've got my watercolour paper here, which is like a medium grade. There's a little bit of texture to it, and I've drawn on my reference picture. So I've got my reference picture from Pexels, which is royalty free, an excellent resource for teachers and students. Do check it out, the link is below if you'd like to follow along with me. I've got a HB pencil that I've just quickly set up my drawing with, so you should be able to see I've got a general outline. My outline is actually a bit darker than you should be looking at, but I want you to be able to see it on the camera, so I've had to go a little bit darker than normal. I have, she says, moving swiftly on, obviously my watercolour pencils. Now I do not use watercolour pencils that frequently within my work. You can see by how good this set looks. If I've got my whole hands on anything and I use it a lot, it's usually worn out and covered in paint. So this is a lovely watercolour set that I'm just about to break in. We'll see how that goes. I've got some clean water there, and I've also got a brush to blend my colours. I have a tissue, so I always find that you can get cross-contamination with any painted medium, just to clean my brush off in between. Now to start off with, I've drawn my model, my reference image, onto my piece of paper. I'm using a HB pencil. It's just a Staedtler Norris out of Tesco, so you can get them really cheaply, and they're a great drawing pencil, I find. You're looking at getting, the main structure of what you're going to be working on. I've also set out a few little perimeters of where the shadows actually lie. I'd recommend that these are quite soft in any drawing you do. If you are going to rub out on watercolour paper, then make sure you're using a putty rubber. It's a little bit more gentle, less likely to damage the fibres of the paper. Losing my mind, standard trick within my work. So go for a putty rubber if removing any guidelines or errors. Try and keep your drawing as crisp as you can. That means in a line format, so that you can see where your lights and your shadows should be, and you've made good decisions that are nice and clear. This way you will find that you create the right colour in the right area and will have fewer mistakes to fix in the long run. With this, the technique that I'm using with the colours can be used across normal colouring pencils. So I've got like normal coloured pencils there, a range from Faber-Castell to Caran d'Ache. Okay, it's exactly the same technique. You will find that the colours slightly vary, and with this, obviously because it's watercolour pencils, I'm going to be adding a little bit of water and pushing them around the surface of the paper, which you can't do with standard pencils. So watercolour pencils, it's just going to give you a slightly different, more smoother result than if you go with a standard pencil. Now with this type of work, ultimately you're going to be working in 3 colours for the skin tone. Obviously we'll deal with the hair and all the dark bits later on, but for the skin tone you need 3 colours. First of all, you need a blue, because underneath the skin tone you've got arteries, and you normally, if you put your hand out, you can see the green. Can you see the green underneath your skin? So you normally need a blue. With some artists, they will go for certain blues. I'm kind of an ultramarine girl. I quite like an ultramarine underneath my skin tones. So I've got an ultramarine blue there. Okay, I'm then going to jump up to my reds, and for my reds here, it's more like a little bit of a warmer cadmium red, pale geranium lake, they're calling it in the Faber-Castell set, but it looks quite cadmium, nice warm red. You're looking for warm, rosy, pinky glow reds. And then to get my kind of creamy skin tone, I'm going to go for like a warm orangey yellow. This is a dark chrome yellow that I've picked up, but you can see it's kind of on the cadmium scale, a little bit warmer probably than normal, but just work with what you've got in your set. Don't worry about having the exact names or the shades, go with it. And if in doubt, get a spare piece of paper, do a little trial run, see which ones, you know, you think give you the best results. Now, we're working in those three, so I'm going to stick those two up there, and I'm going to work with the blue to start off with. Some coloured pencil artists will draw the whole thing in the blue at the earliest stage, not the pencil. It's again personal preference, and the type of end result is slightly different. You can do it in that. You could draw it in a water soluble pencil if you're going in for the watercolours. That will mean that when you add the water on for the colour, it will wash away your graphite tone, giving you a much more realistic result. It's again up to you if that's the kind of direction you want to take with your work. So I'm keeping this simple. I'm going to go in and start working my blue up in the areas that I've got a darker tone. Now, because this is watercolour paper, I am getting a slight kind of patination to my marks. If you're doing this with standard pencil on smooth paper, you probably will not be able to get that same effect, but don't worry about it. Some artists who work in this medium prefer to work up a few different tones of blue. Again, I always recommend that you try things and see which one works best for you. You can see I'm looking at the shadow around the eye socket at the moment and working that up. Holding the pencil underneath, can you see how I'm holding it underneath, and I'm holding it quite low to the paper, so I'm using a lot of the head. The more pencil you put on the paper, the stronger the pigment's going to be when you add the water, if you're going for the watercolour pencils. If you're not, and you're going for normal pencils, then try and keep your tones very smooth. You see that shadow? Generally when drawing portraits, the top lip is always darker than the bottom lip. So by adding in a little bit of the blue, when I put the red in, I will get that lilac-y shadow tone. I can see that coming around here as well. The trick is always, if you're not sure about how much you should be adding, to add only a little bit and then to boost it as you go along. Now she's going to look a bit crazy at this stage. Don't worry about it. It's all going to work out. Trust me. So once I've got that, now what you can do is you can look at adding in the red, or some people prefer to use the watercolour at this stage and to smooth it out. If you are going to make it wet, you do have to allow the paper to dry before you can add in more colour. So keep an eye on kind of your timing. Now I'm going to be a little bit quicker on this, and I'm going to come in with some of my red. So I can start building up some of those creamier tones. If you're using just standard pencil, then obviously this is how you would be doing it. But you'd be keeping your shading a little bit tighter because you won't have the perk of the water smoothing it out across the surface of the paper. You do need to be very gentle, more gentle with the watercolour pencils than if you were doing this with the standard pencils. So I'm looking at putting the red over anywhere there I'm going to have deeper shadow, or anywhere that I'm going to make a little bit more orangey, because I'm going to put obviously the yellow on top of this red, and that will make it go orange once I put the watercolour on, the water into the pigment. Okay, now I'm going to add in my yellow. I'm trying to be very careful around anywhere where I want the white to become a highlight. So you can see on this highlight and around the chin. Now that I've got my basic tones down, then I can grab my paintbrush, a little bit of clean water, and working at the top, I can start smoothing them out. And grab a little bit of tissue. Just to make sure. Now the trick with this is that obviously you've got the hair that's going to be sitting over it, is to go push that pigment further into the hair so that it ends up just sitting underneath the darker work that we're going to start building up later on. Let's bring a little bit of shadow under the nose. You can always take your tissue and take it off if you're finding that you're getting too much pigment on the surface. With watercolour pencils, they generally dry lighter than they look when they're wet. So do keep this in mind, that the work will fade a bit. So don't worry if you've gone too bright anywhere, because it'll dull down. Now she's going to look very pale and washed out at this stage, but it's the basic colour that we're going to use to work up from. So don't worry about it too much. Just make sure that it looks nice and smooth and that you don't have any brush marks on the surface of the paper. And just add a little bit more fresh water in if you need to, and even out brushwork to wherever you're going to make it darker to. Right, once you've done that, you need to allow that to dry. So you can either blast up the hairdryer or take a 10-minute break. Right, so now we've got like the base colour down, we need to start working it up, and this is probably when you're going to look at bringing in a few other shades and colours. She's really quite orangey in my picture, so I'm going to be looking at using a lot of kind of red and yellows to build it up. I've got some shades, but the shades do need to be increased. So I am going to start working those up. I'm going to go in with a slightly stronger blue, because it's a little bit stronger and darker, and start working up. So my hands move down the head of the pencil, and I need to get these lilac-y tones in for the shadow of the eye socket. I'm being quite gentle on my downward pressure. I don't want too much pigment on the paper. Remember, the harder you press, the more pigment you put on the paper, the stronger it's going to look when you mix the colours and add the water. You can always add, it's much harder to take away. Right, so now that I've got that blue down, just to see how it looks, I'm going to add in a little bit of a red to make it go a little bit plummier when it's mixed on the surface. So I can see what the shading is like. Again, like with the blue, be gentle or you're going to end up with a really pink or purple character. Now, while I've got the blue and the red down, and I want those to mix on the surface, because I've got a base colour, I've put a little bit of water and I've just slid my fingers through it, so I haven't got a huge amount of water. I'm going to use my brush to manipulate where those colours mix on the surface of my paper and generate the shadows. I can add more water to smooth out the shadow, so if I've had too much pigment and I feel it's going too lilac-y, add more water in, dilute the pigment, and you can blot off with a tissue. Just up here I feel like I'm going way too purple, so I've added in a little bit of water, and then I'm going to just blot off with my tissue and soften out the amount of pigment I've got on the surface of the paper. And on the second round you can see that your shadow should be getting much stronger. So I've just done that bit to show you, and then I'm going to repeat that for the process of the drawing. Right, so you can see more of the shadows have been built up on the face. Obviously she's very warm and we're going to lighten that and go very warm with the orange, but having these lilac tones in just to start you off will really benefit you in the long run. So get those in and then allow it to dry again. We're going to work up the oranges and make her a little bit more warmer in skin tone. I'll see you in a moment. Okay, so now let's bring up some of the oranges. So you're going to be looking at using your reds and oranges and yellows. I've got some orange here. I'm going to start warming up her skin tone a little bit because it should look very cold. And we need to bring some heat back into it. So I've got a cadmium orange that I'm working in. I'm going to work this in with a yellow, as you'll see as I work down the picture. So she's quite warm up the top here. Now if you've gone over it and it's gone really dark, it's because the paper's a little bit wet. Don't worry about that, I'll leave that out in a little while. You can see I'm putting that down and I'm grabbing a yellow, and I've got a cadmium yellow. I'm going to work that up on top just to soften down that orange. This depends on what shades of orange you're working on, but if you've gone and it looks a little bit David Dickinson and you need to smooth it out and soften it down, grab a lighter yellow and start working that into the base colour. You might have other areas that look a little bit more reddy, so you might want to grab your red and warm up the orange and give it a bit more of a pinky glow, which you can do. Right, so I've got the bare bones down. I'm just going to grab my brush and again work back in. Right, so it's starting to slowly build up and you should be seeing a little bit more intense colour on your piece of paper. You can see just like I've got here. At this stage you do need to allow it to dry again before you work back in. If you work in and it's wet, you will end up with these really dark pencil marks which aren't great. So be patient, allow that to dry off for 10 minutes and then come back to it and we'll start working in the darker tones for the features, which is a little bit more tricky, but not too bad. You hopefully can see by now how it's taken those three colours and keep layering them up and gently building up the colour, not jumping in straight away with trying to get the tone correct immediately. You'll get much more realistic and accurate drawing in this way. I'll see you in a moment. Right, so now that you've got the main structure of the picture down and it's dried out, you need to start building up the shadow tone. Let's work in from the nose for instance. Now what I would recommend is that you use a dark brown, okay, and I'm going to work that up around the nostril area. I'm being quite gentle and then I can build that one up just here to the right. Now I'm also going to use the brown as a little bit of shadow just around the side of the nose and in a few bits where you're getting a little bit more of a shadow tone, just there. And there's a little bit of shadow on the tip of the nose, and a little bit more up here. So I'm being very gentle on the tonal work, but just to bring that in, like so. Then I'm going to grab a little bit of black and I'm going to just up that by a soft touch of black, nothing too harsh. Once you've got that down, then bring your hand close, draw in to clarify the edge of the nostril, and you can see just like that you should be getting the basic structure of the nose. Right, so once you've got that basic line drawn down, then grab a small fine pointed brush, take off the excess water and bleed it out into the nostril. So one side is a line and the other side you get a tonal graduation that appears more natural. If you want to cover those bits, make them look like shadows, those are just worked into the main painting. And before you know it, you should have a nose like that. So then you can work on and do the eye. And with the eye, we're working on the same process. So let's first of all bring in a bit of shadow work for the main section of the eye. I'm just using a brown to get a feel for where everything is. Then you've got the lashes that you need to work up and the eyeliner. So look at how that comes into the side of the nose. You also have the lower liner that's arching up around the eye. Then I'm going to grab a little bit of the black and work some of that into the brown. I'm going to bring a little bit of black just up here to get that idea of the shadow, and then I've got the eyeliner that's working into the eye section of the artwork. And let's bring some lashes in. Got a little bit coming up over here, and we also have a little bit of shadow from the eye socket coming around here. I'm just going to clean that up. That comes up, and then we've got some lashes around there as well. So let's take a fine brush, work up some of the base section of the lashes. Trick is to clean your brush and make sure you don't have too much pigment, just enough to give you the tone that looks correct. Add a little bit of water into the white of the eye just to soften it down by cross-contaminating it with a little bit of mild brown. And we'll repeat with the same process on the opposite eye. Now this is just like how we've done the skin. It's going to take a few layers to get to the deeper tones that look realistic. So be careful by how much you're putting on. You don't want to put on loads. It's better to put on a little bit and just get a feel for how much should go on the eye. You can't build it up until the layer's dry. So just take your time. Okay, so we're going to let that settle, and we're going to come back and rework them up because they're going to be quite mild at this stage. And now we've got to work with the lips. So with the lips, they're a little bit more pinky. So choose a nice soft pinky tone that you want to build up with the lips. And see here, I'm working out like a fan. And I'm going to be really gentle and build it in very slowly with the colours that I already have sitting on the piece of paper. And you might find that you need to go a little bit more red, because she has got quite reddy toned lips in this. Or you could end up with it being too pink. Then I'm going to grab a little bit of my blue to work a little bit of the shadow. Come up to the teeth on either side. There's also a little bit of shadow that's sitting around on the top and a little bit on the bottom. And up the shadow underneath to throw the lips up as well. And I'm going to up the shadow a little bit more underneath the nose. There's a few areas actually I think that could benefit from a little bit more of a boost of shadow tone. So just adding that in, and then I'll paint that up in a moment. I want a little bit of a softer grey on the teeth, so I'm putting that in, and then I'm going to get my black, and I'm going to start working in a little bit more of a crisper drawing. Then I'm going to grab my brush and just smooth some of that out, bringing it where I want to bleed up that stronger tone and where I might want to leave the initial colour I've got poking through. To look at where your highlights are in the direction of your brush mark. And smooth in some grey and a little bit of shadow over the teeth so it looks a little bit more natural. And then work out that extra bit of shadow I thought I'd just put on the face to throw a little bit more depth into the artwork. Now I'm going to increase a little bit of orange because it looks a bit more orangey down here. So you can see how we're building up still. A little bit more orange on here. And I'm going to put a little bit more orange on that side cheek, just a touch. And get my brush and work that into the layers. And you should end up with something that looks like that. Now, while we're waiting for her features to dry, just to work up a little bit more, I'm going to build in her hair. So I'm going to grab some grey. You can see that highlight coming in over here, so I'm going to leave the white of the paper for the highlight. That actually looks a little bit like a plummy purple that's in here as well, so I'm going to be building that up as well. Just bring in a few grey lines and mid-tones that I want to bring into the hairline. So let's go for that lilac-y shade. And a little bit more of a plummy. I'm going to go for the plummy shade. Obviously it depends on how your printer is printed off the reference image, because every printer usually prints them off slightly different. So be careful when following any colour combinations from the classes, because I've been very much aware how it can look a little bit different. And then I'm going to grab some black. And work that out. So I'm going to have some darker tones once I feed that water into the surface. Now some watercolourists that work with pencils rather like leaving the pencil lines. You can leave them if you want to and have the hair in that kind of way, or if you want to, you can grab your brush and you can smooth some out and treat it more like a painting. You will need to flick your brush to get the nice kind of pointed lines of hair. So maybe a little bit of a practice before you go into your drawing that you've worked so hard on. You can see how strong black is in the watercolour set. It really gives it a kick of tone. That's why I introduced the lilac-y shade. Give it a little bit more of an interesting combination. I'm going to bring in a little bit of black around the side of the face. And a little bit of shadow work underneath here. Careful, like I said before, about your black. Be gentle on your downward pressure so you've only got a small amount coming onto your paper. Do that just quickly. I'm going to then grab a brush, smooth that out. There. Bit of shadow around the neck and onto the jawline. I'm going to go around a little bit of a tissue just to soften off the tone. But you can see there, she's pretty much there. I just go in, I'll strengthen up a few bits. So you can see here the eye should be much deeper with the makeup tone. you can do it better than I can because you've got a bit more time, but I can give you a rough idea of where you should be going. You can see I'm just giving it a little bit more oomph. And I'm going to grab my brush. You should be getting something that looks like that. Okay, now this requires a little bit of practice for you to get used to how much you're putting on the paper and what kind of tones you can build up. But it's a nice little intro just to get you kind of feeling the way. Practice makes perfect as always. Go and have a go. Use the reference image below and I'll see you next time around. Bye everyone.